Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Um, I'll just go through a couple introductions right now, and then that might give people a minute to join. But this is our second town hall this year, and it is focused on NYSED priorities. NYSED is the New York State Education Department. They have a bunch of big things happening this year. And so I wanted to take the opportunity 4 times this school year to review them, kind of talk about the evolution over the school year, and then provide some insight about what the district is doing. The 4 main priorities this year for the State Education Department are they had a blue ribbon commission around graduation measures and what does it mean to graduate from New York State high school and get a diploma. Not much to report on this time, so we're going to hold off on that one, but then we are going to talk about cell phones in schools. And actually, I'll just jump over to the next slide so you can see the Blue Ribbon Commission, Regionalization Discussion, the Science of Reading, and then cell phones in schools. Blue Ribbon Commission, I talked about a little bit, not much going on right now. They are actually reporting out in December about the timeline, but we will talk about regionalization and where we are with that. I have Mrs. Steiner with us, who will join us for the Science of Reading. And then we'll also talk about cell phones in schools and what we're doing right now. I'll say it a couple times. If you have any questions during this presentation, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can go ahead and put your question in the comment section. I will see it, and I will try to get to it right away. We can discuss it, because if you have that question, other people will probably have the same question too. I can get to it right away, or we can jump back at the end and answer any questions. But feel free. I think there is a little bit of a delay on your end, so if I don't quite get to the question right away, that it is coming with the answer. All right, so with that, let's talk about the Blue Ribbon Commission. Actually, we're going to go right over to the regionalization discussion. And I am going to jump out of this for a second, because as things happen, I pulled up the wrong presentation. So just give me 1 second, and I'm going to pull up the right one. I apologize for that. Let me pull up the right one. And as I said before, feel free to jump in at any point with questions. I apologize for this glitch. And here we are. All right. I managed to find it. All right. All right, I was a little thrown off because I knew we weren't talking about the Blue Ribbon Commission. All right, so we're back at it. Feel free to jump in with your questions. So this is the second of 4. And so let's get into it and talk about, here are our 3 topics: regionalization, cell phones in schools, and the science of reading. So first up, regionalization. Quick recap. New York State came out with a regionalization needs assessment tool. And so New York State asked all 700 districts in New York State to complete this regionalization tool. And I am going to click on this, because what I can do is provide the link to that. I will put the link in that for that regionalization tool because we did it. So all 700 districts in New York State were asked to do the regionalization assessment. And basically, you had to compile a bunch of information regarding classes offered, graduation rates, testing results, and provide it for the state, and also reflect on your strengths and weaknesses. So they asked all 700 districts to do this. But then they started getting pushback. State senators and assemblymen started asking, why is the state asking for this? There were some very vocal districts throughout the state saying while there was an explanation of why the state was asking them to do it, there was, what is the state going to do with this information? Are they going to start redistributing state aid based on these needs assessments? And there was quite a lot of pushback. From Western New York, the state got about 1,000 emails asking these questions from Western New York alone. And so they asked us to do this needs assessment, which I will provide the link to. The draft is on our website. And so they wanted them all completed and submitted by December 6th. I believe it was December 1st where they said, hold on, it is not mandatory to do this needs assessment. And they provided the opportunity for school boards to say, we want to participate or not. And so before I hit the submit button, pretty much the day before, NYSED came out with that, hold on, it's not mandatory. So the Board of Education, our Board of Education will actually be discussing this at tomorrow's board meeting, 6 o'clock, about whether this is necessary for us to partake in. What the state doesn't understand is that small districts have been doing this for a while, and we do have a lot of great cooperation in our area. So the board will be discussing that and whether or not we will submit our information. But I want to assure everybody that's listening to this that we are already working with our neighbors to find ways to offer the best education to our students. And so while I don't know what will come at the state level from this regionalization information, I know that it is also causing even more conversations in the local area about what we can do. So that was regionalization. Cell phones in schools. Some of you may have participated in our surveys already. And this comes up because Governor Hochul has made it very clear that she will be presenting some sort of ban of cell phones in schools. She has stated she wants a bell to bell, so let's say 8 to 3 ban of cell phones in schools for students. Now, will that end up being the final recommendation or what she says? Because it is tied up in her budget talks and the state of the state address that she does in the new year. I don't know where she'll end up coming out, but I do know there will be suggestions, rules, some sort of action that we need to take as a district regarding cell phones in schools. And I will put up the link to this survey as well. And I'm just going to see if I can open this piece of data. And it did open. Just to give everybody looking, like this information, we did do surveys with students, faculty, staff, and families. And so this information is some of the data that we got from students, faculty, staff, and families. So here, simple question, policy preferences for cell phones. No cell phones allowed during school hours. Students, that was not their preference. And I mixed up a little bit of the percentages here. This is actually, so that's 2.5% of students, or 2.5 students. Don't like that. Faculty and staff, that was their overwhelming preference. And then a good chunk of families also like that. Cell phones allowed only during non-instructional time. That was pretty much split across. So that would be similar to schools that have a ban during class time, but they might allow students to use their cell phones at lockers or during lunches. So that was pretty much split. Flexible use depending on teacher discretion, that was the preference of students. And then we go down from there. So I don't think this was shocking regarding the information, but what I'll talk about after this data is the fact that we are putting together a committee. And here are some of the things that the committee is going to have to resolve. So if we look at cell phone survey, faculty and staff, impact on learning. Do cell phones impact learning? And this is where the percentages, these are actually numbers. So positive impact, 2 faculty and staff members said there's a positive impact. 32% said negative, and then 5, no impact. Okay, so this faculty and staff believe that cell phones have a negative impact during the school day on education. And this is a great place if you are watching and you want to jump in with a comment regarding whether you're a student who entered this data, parent, guardian, faculty member. This is not surprising. Then we go to students. Learning distraction. Do you feel that cell phones are a distraction to your learning? We had 2 students say yes, 87 say no, and 23 said sometimes. So here we are. This committee is going to have to deal with the fact that faculty and staff believe that it is a distraction, and most students that answered this survey. We had over 100 students answer this survey, which is great. It was over 25% of our total student population. So here are these 2 changes. And then the data point that I found most interesting from parents and guardians, communication with students. How important is it for you to be able to contact your child during school hours? So we had right around 100 parents respond. 39, very important. 40, somewhat important, and not so important. And if you are a parent, listen to this. And that somewhat important, I take that somewhat important to mean in emergencies. If there is a crisis at school, that's somewhat important for families meant that is when they need communication. And this is a question we will talk about at our committee. So if you are a parent or guardian and you have some insight into what that somewhat important means, please throw it in the chat because I'm interested in that as well, and I'm sure other people are. So I just wanted to really go through that a little bit to talk about the different data set we are going to have to work through as a committee when we're talking about cell phones in schools. So I said I will share this link. You can look, these links are live that you see on this presentation for all of the data that we collected from faculty, staff, students, and families that we'll be using in the committee. And I am going to share. I actually have the survey. And I'm going to put it in So right there in the comments, it is the live link to the survey asking for volunteers for our cell phone policy committee. So going back to what I originally said about Governor Hochul, she will give us some information about rules for the 25-26 school year going forward about cell phones. But I also want us to work through this process because I do not believe it will be a hard and fast rule. There will be guidelines that schools need to follow. So what does that mean to ARCPort? What type of cell phone policy do our students, faculty and staff, parents and guardians, what is the cell phone policy that we can agree on as a group? So that's the committee. So that link is live. I will share that with all families through our messaging system. So if you don't click on it now, but you want to later, that is fine. It'll come out later this week. But that's where we are with cell phones in schools. And we will meet, our first meeting will be sometime towards the end of January, early February. And the whole goal of that committee is to look at our data, look at the information we collected, look at the options that are out there, look at the research about what cell phones actually do to students in schools, and then come up with recommendations for our Board of Education regarding possibilities for changes in our cell phone policy for the 25-26 school year. That we're not talking about changing it this year. This will be moving forward. And our last topic is the science of reading. So Mrs. Steiner will be joining us shortly, and then she will be able to provide a little information about where we are right now for ARCPort. But as a quick review, the science of reading it's not a program, it's not a curriculum, it's a way about thinking about how do we teach ELA in school. Some of us will remember the two different kind of ways that reading has been taught over the last 30 or 40 years in New York State public schools. And we go back and forth, and we've gone back and forth over the last 40 years. There is phonics instruction, which is really the pure science of what are the sounds, how do you put those together to write and read. And then there was whole language, which was, these two things were really opposite of each other. Whole language was immersion. You learn to read through reading and listening, and not a lot of phonics instruction. The science of reading really talks about how it's not either or. It is all of those things put together. So there are 6 core concepts to the science of reading, and they are all equally important. They focus and emphasize oral language. You might be able to read, you might be able to write, but can you speak fluently? Phonological awareness is different than phonics. Phonological awareness is how speech sounds. The simplest explanation I can give for phonological awareness is rhyming. When our young kids, kindergarten kids, learn about rhyming, cat, hat, that is phonological awareness. How does speech sound? And Mrs. Steiner has joined us, so I'm going to bring her in because this is her wheelhouse. Mrs. Steiner, can you hear? I'm going to unmute you. There you are. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, everybody.
All right. So I just started talking about science of reading, and I will say, Mrs. Steiner, most of you know Mrs. Steiner. She's been in many different positions over the last 15 years. Currently, she is our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and it is helping so much because we have somebody that has the time to work deeply in these topics. So I was just going through the 6 main areas. I just talked about phonological awareness. Then you get to phonics. How do you put letter sounds together to read and write? Then we have comprehension, whether it's oral language, reading, watching a play. Comprehension is huge. Next up is fluency. And last is vocabulary. They really focus on these 6 areas. I did probably a pretty bad job, Mrs. Steiner, of explaining the difference of whole language, phonics, and what science of reading is. You want to jump in there and give a much better explanation than I did.
Well, first, you did great. We are both actually high school people by trade. So some of this literacy information is actually, to be honest, sort of new to us. So we're all kind of learning here. Those of us who are normally part of the high school. But I just wanted to kind of summarize what we are doing in ARCPOR and start off by saying that we already do all of these things, these 6 categories. They are already a part of what we do. But what this recent push has led us to do and be more reflective about is how do we teach literacy in a more systematic way and really be intentional about implementing all of these areas in a way that makes sense, gives us the most bang for our buck, so to speak. So one thing that I wanted to talk about that we've been doing as a region, some of the instructional leaders, people in roles like mine in our BOCES have been getting together for the past several months. And together we developed a tool where we had different groups really think about each category and what that would look like in the classroom at different levels. So in the elementary and in the high school. And we built this tool together with certain look-fors that we can all take back to our district and do some observations, have the teachers observe each other, reflect on their own practice, visit other schools, and get an idea of what our current state might be in all of those categories. How are we teaching oral language, for example? We might think of that happening in the primary grades, but what does oral language look like in the high school? So for example, our students summarizing verbally what they are learning. That might be something that we observe in a high school class. So we will be, right after the winter break here, we will be using that tool to get a better idea of our current state at every level in each category. So that's really important. Something else that all schools in the state, right, are working on is that pre-K to 3 curriculum review. So that's perfect timing for us because we planned on doing that anyway, deciding what we need and where we want to go with our primary and elementary ELA curriculum. So we will be working on that. And I just wanted to also mention that our RTI program in the elementary is really helpful because they are a step ahead in some respects because they are teaching phonics and sort of bringing back phonics in a way that we didn't do in the past. So we're trying to get ahead of that. And so kudos to them for already implementing some of that phonics instruction again. And like Mr. Harper said, that's just one element, but it's an important one. So that's just an example of what they are doing also. So really, we're just trying to put all of that together and improve our literacy overall using the science of reading, which is really a body of research and an approach to teaching kids how to read and using the best instructional practices for that.
Mrs. Steiner has said this in the past, and I always have to credit her because I steal it. And this wasn't necessarily how it happened in schools, but there was this kind of base belief that PK through 3, you learn to read. And then after 3rd grade, you read to learn, right? You learn to read, you're done learning to read. Now you're using it to learn everything else. And I really appreciate, because I was a struggling reader in elementary school. I really didn't start reading until 6th grade. This talks about how learning to read, the science of reading, is a PK-12 continuum. So you're not learning to read just in PK3. You're learning to read the entire time because that complexity increases. You get to introduce more forms of the English language and different types, and you are always learning in complexity. And I really appreciate it. It allows students to come to reading in their own way. And anybody that has multiple children or nieces and nephews or teaches, you see fundamentally how different students come to reading at different times. And the science of reading starts to recognize that.
Right, I agree.
And so this curriculum review that all districts in New York State are doing, it really, this is not, we're gonna throw out our curriculum, we might make improvements, but it's actually just looking at where our gaps are. And I need to say this for our teachers, I would have put this usability part as number one on the review. And it really talks about a literacy curriculum is flexible and easy to use for teachers. Provides clear explanation and guidance for teachers. Our elementary teachers do amazing work, but sometimes we forget they're doing amazing work in multiple subjects. And it is the district's responsibility, in coordination with them, in working with our teachers, to come up with a curriculum and materials that allow them to do the teaching and be present with the students and not worrying about what information, what texts they need to gather for the next day.
Right, and I just wanted to add that the instructional practice too is something that our teachers are really eager to explore. So for example, everybody knows that vocabulary is important, and we would all say that, but do we all really know the best ways to teach vocabulary? I think we all kind of struggle with that and want some really concrete ideas of what are the best ways for kids to improve their vocabulary, which improves their comprehension and their fluency. And so that's something that we will be discussing, and teachers will have really actionable things to implement in their classroom and share with each other. That's just going to be really beneficial in every content area. So it really will hit everyone, which is going to be great.
All right, so a little wrap up. And as I said before, throw your questions in. We're going to stick around for a couple minutes. But that's the short version of what's going on with state initiatives and where we are as a district. So this was today, December 10th. This is the virtual. We have two more virtual, one in person on February 4th and 6th. And those, again, we're going to update where are we, where is the state. And then you do have the link to the cell phone survey in the chat, but that will go out to families later on this week, and we'll be posting information on Facebook. So if community members want to be involved, but outside of that, that is the end of our meeting. And Mrs. Steiner and I will jump off the screen, but we'll stick around for a couple minutes just to see if there's any questions that come up. Please don't hesitate, throw them in there. We'll answer whatever goes up. But if that is it for you, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time.